Cool. Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of Thought Leaders. I'm your host, Chris Sheng, and today we've got Andy Vitale, who is the Chief Design Officer of Constant Contact. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Chris. Super happy to be here.
Of course. So tell us a lot. Constant Contact's been around for a while, large company, but tell us a little bit about what you guys do, the types of companies that you guys work with.
Yeah, so we've been around for about 30 years,
Yeah.
and Constant Contact is a digital marketing platform. We enable small businesses, nonprofits to really boost their marketing efforts, right? So for us, it's really about how do we help them focus on what they do in their business and their day to day and not have to worry so much about marketing. And we provide tools and solutions that really help amplify their marketing efforts for them.
Got it. Very cool. Um, I would love to kind of like just dive into your journey right away, because it's always an interesting, process to me in terms of like understanding why somebody ends up to where they are, typically when they end up in the senior management roles. But you started off doing design and then more specifically UX design, but tell us about like what was your initial interest in terms of like the design world in general? Like where did that initially stem from?
So for me, design is something like a lot of people, we kind of transitioned into it over
Yeah.
time. I had no intention of being a designer at first. I knew that I wanted to do something related to computers. And the school that I went to had really two options. One was design, the other one was computer networking.
Mm.
And I was more attracted to what design had to offer and immediately fell in love with the practice. And um, as this industry has transitioned, I've been fortunate enough to follow trends, set trends, be part of things as they were happening, and really see how it evolved from the early days of graphic design into more of the digital, from print to digital, and eventually emerging like UX and the disciplines that made up UX in the beginning. And now as we make this transition into more of a strategic powerhouse of product design, of ways to really differentiate organizations through providing and creating experiences that meet and exceed the needs of the customers that use our products. It's just been a fantastic journey.
Yeah, interesting. Um, I think more, people are definitely more comprehensive around, I feel like the definition of like UX, UI nowadays than maybe like 5, 10 years ago, but you've been in this for quite a while. So what was like the promise of, or what was, I guess, like what did you think you were signing up for when it was like design in the very beginning? Like, was it more on the graphic side? Did you know like it would be a lot of like testing, or did you know that would be trying to, optimize usage or any of those things? I'm just curious as to like what was the
No,
context of how you got into?
yeah, I mean, this was 24 years ago.
Yeah.
So it was still really early days of the web. And really, the web was still a bit of a way to play and express yourself through a creative outlet. A lot of the print work that I saw, a lot of the marketing things, like thought, hey, we're going to create some amazing logos and brand identity and do things like that. And as it's transitioned, it's really gone beyond just like the artifact and even beyond like the screens that are put in front of us. But for me, like early days, I worked for a newspaper. I worked for a cruise line doing newspaper ads. I worked for the tabloids. So doing a lot of like, how do we communicate a message through this medium of print? Because there weren't a lot of digital jobs then. There weren't a lot of like web jobs for companies back in 2000. As that went, I guess they're kind of not, at least not where I lived, right? Not in South Florida. It was still very print heavy and magazine heavy. But as I made that transition, really I guess the thing that broke the mold for me was the invention of the iPhone, right? And apps. I mean, at that point, we were doing a lot of like web things, but how do we tie together this ecosystem where you can have a screen on your computer, you can have a screen in your pocket, and the boom of everybody wanting an app or a mobile presence at that point is really what elevated my career.
Interesting. Could you dive into that a little bit more? Because I think it definitely makes sense, right? I think if you look at, you know, yeah, I mean, I love to go on the Wayback Machine and just kind of see like the different evolutions, right? Like, so you can very clearly tell like it wasn't like aesthetics wasn't necessarily like the biggest thing on a lot of people's minds in like Web 1.0, right? And then you're tying together mobile in addition to a web application. And so, that's ultimately now you need to make that transition for the user experience seamless between both interfaces. But and you kind of alluded to that, but can you tell us a little bit more about like unpack a little bit more what you mean by that in terms of once we had the iPhone come out and
Yeah, yeah. So
take
real early in my career, a lot of the websites that at least I were doing were like one-off small business. Who needs a website? What restaurant needs to get their menu online? And I ended up starting an agency and we did bigger scale work. We did some work for BlackBerry. We did some work for the Discovery and Science Museum of Fort Lauderdale. We pitched an app for Flowrida, right? And at that point, I ended up going to a company, Office Depot. And Office Depot at the time was the sixth largest e-commerce site in the world. But this was 2011-ish. So a lot of what they offered is very different than what you see today. And early days of web, like our mobile website was like a couple of boxes that you could click on to expand a navigation and eventually drill into products. It was very like we were trying to structure the unstructured, but we were fortunate enough to be large enough to really partner with Apple at a time when the iPhone was introducing the App Store and different features through iOS. So we were able to be early partners for like the application of Passbook, which is now known as Apple Wallet, or express registration, in-store pickup, social login. Like all of those things were new at the time. And being at a company large enough to need those and identify those needs for customers allowed me to get at the forefront at building some of those designs and that technology.
Got it. Super interesting. What was that experience like to be like, I guess because, when you talk about like an Apple, for example, and the idea of like Apple Wallet or your Passbook and these different types of features and functionalities that, it's almost like it's like you're dealing with innovation right at the front line of it, right? And it's like these things that never existed other than that would make it easier for the user. It would make it easier for the customer. And it's almost like reverse engineering to like, so then what does that look like? And then like, how does that then ultimately bake into what you guys were doing because you were such a large organization that allowed for that kind of partnership to unfold itself. But like when you started to hear some of these functionalities that they wanted to roll out, what was your like initial thoughts? Um,
My thought for sure was like, yes, all in, right?
yeah,
I've always loved anything new, emerging technology, being an early adopter, and being able to do that at the scale of a company that size was really exciting to me. So Apple was so interesting because they came to us with a solution already, right? Can we apply this to some sort of in-store usage for us? Can we apply it to either the Office Depot credit card? It wasn't taking payments at that time when it was originally developed. It was like a little bit of a coupon book. That was how early the thinking was around that. We met with their evangelism team who were like, this is the product that we're trying to build. This is the feature that we have. Like, is there a way to apply it? And it turned into more of a day of like brainstorming together and co-creating if there was a way for us to do that. And we were able to leverage that for a couple of different things that was exciting. But even at that time, when you talk about things like social login or developing an in-store app, one of the things I also got to work on there really early was an augmented reality piece with the band One Direction. You could go into the store and hold up your phone to like a flyer of the One Direction and it'll come to life and play a video. And just those early days were such a playground of like, will this work? Is it a technology that we need? It was long before the days that you mentioned earlier of like optimization
yeah,
and trying to get the most out of what we have and making the right tweaks to really drive impact for our customers. This was still like, all right, this is a cool technology. Let's see if it works. Let's see if people will use it. Let's be, let's be cool and modern and try to roll this out. I mean, social media, this was the dawn of Web 2.0, right? If people were logging in through Facebook, early Facebook login to apps. Like, why would we create a barrier
Yeah,
where no, you have to do your email or your phone number to sign up for us? So all of these technologies were kind of offered up to us as ways for us to be at the forefront because of who we were.
interesting. Um, can you talk us, and since Office Depot, your resume reads, so well in terms of large organization, Fortune 500 companies, right? And you kind of gone through these different graduations for each of these companies. What's been some of the takeaways, from being exposed to these types of innovations to then start leading and creating some of these innovations? And you mentioned already kind of before and alluded to, setting trends. And what were some of those things that you started to develop and innovate on? And how does that process work for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, yeah, I feel like I've talked the longest I've ever talked about my time at Office Depot. So, that's interesting. But from there, I ended up at a company called Belk, an digital e-commerce company. They had they still do have brick and mortar stores in Southeast, but after that, I went to 3M, and that's really where I became familiar with strategy and innovation. Like 3M is this company that's got 100 years of innovation, and I was the second UX hire in the company. And
Oh, wow.
eventually, I ended up growing a team that was focused on enterprise software and healthcare. A lot of people don't even realize that's a space that 3M plays in. And this was such a time where we were able to leverage AI in 2015, 2016 for our customers in the form of natural language processing and auto suggested medical coding. So 3M has an encoder, and the goal is to, if it's an outpatient or inpatient, the goal at the time was to efficiently and effectively get bills out the door. And then they started to add a layer where you can monitor quality of care. There'd be different nurses that would have to interface with different doctors. So for us, how do we build this tool that they can all communicate in this one source of truth to make sure that not only does the bill go out the door, but the quality of care is held up so that hospitals basically don't get paid if they cause someone to be readmitted to a hospital. So how do we focus on quality of care for that to happen? How do we create that space to communicate? And then how do we drive this change to where people who right now, when you talk to them in that moment, they remembered these codes because they were in it all day. So how do you get them to trust this auto-suggested coding? We spent a lot of time and they're like, hey, you know what? I don't trust this. I don't trust the machine. I trust my own knowledge. But then the level of specificity changed and they adopted a new diagnosis code. So it shifted globally. And that allowed us to spend enough time to realize that they were looking to us to suggest the code, and then they were using their knowledge or the book that they used as a reference point, as a double check. And as they gained that confidence, they shifted over to us. And what we learned through that process, we were able to apply to really how do we solve a problem about population health as a whole and think about ways to reduce readmissions throughout. And we saw that as a $1 trillion industry. And we were able to create a product that was able to identify over $1 billion in cost savings in the first 10 hospital groups that we piloted with. So we were looking at ways like how the service line treats the patient, what outpatient facility they go to, what medication they're given, how that plays a part in what happens to the customer. And this was a way to apply technology through a human-centered way. And a lot of the innovation that I've had in my career, the ways to innovate, is by doing just that. It's like thinking about the customer and what they need and understanding technologies that are available and figuring out the right way to apply them in a way that doesn't make the person feel like they're losing control of what tasks or what jobs they need to do.
Interesting. You talked about, I mean, basically what you're describing here is like creating creating a new process and getting adoption, or kind of like the steps to full adoption, right? Which that's that when you're doing something in the very beginning and you are truly innovating, that's the hurdle. That's the challenge, is like trying to get people to trust what that new process is. And so from learning what that was like, what are some other instances, or I guess like maybe not even instances, but like if you look at it from a more holistic level, as a chief design officer now, but somebody who has this great experience in UX, like, you know, how much of that is like ideation and art of part of like the UI versus like part of like fleshing out the workflow of the psychology of the user, and then yeah, I guess like kind of like the science behind it in terms of like how do you get to a proposal of what a user experience should look like, or is it like an iterative process that you're doing in real time with the users?
I think it's a mix of both, right? I think it is truly an art and a science. And I think that depending on the organization and their comfort and understanding and ideation has a lot to play in how that process plays out. So when you think about the perfect process, it is one of co-creation and iteration, right? But sometimes that's not the easiest way.
Yeah.
Getting people aligned through like conversation and exercise doesn't always happen. So one of the areas design plays in that early innovation part is to at least show up with something, right? Show up with something that people can react to no matter how early it is. Because as designers, we know that our first few attempts at something are wrong. But when someone sees it, it helps them articulate their perspective a little bit better than if you just ask them. And a lot of that happens internally at first, and it's a very messy process. And it really is like, how do we paint a picture of a vision? How do we pare it back based on what our capabilities, limitations are, what gaps we have in understanding that we have to go continue to learn? And we want to paint a really strong picture of what we feel is right, but not in a high fidelity, so that we can then go and validate that and start co creating with customers really early. I think that early co-creation is what allows us to drive the right outcomes and make sure that we're headed in the right direction. We did that a lot at 3M. We've done that a lot since then. It's something that I really believe to be true. When we think about the holistic journey, it really is important to at least start with a high level view of what that journey is, what the customer will go through end to end. Because if you solve for one point in the end to end process, no matter how great you make that, it doesn't solve the holistic end to end, and you're going to run into problems. So it is important to understand, no matter what you're solving for, how they come in and get to that point and where they go after that point that you're designing for. And from there, when you put that together, you just have to make sure that like you're validating that along the way. And like you have to be prepared to be wrong more than you're right, because you will learn from those misunderstandings or misinterpretations of what people want quickly. And it's better to be able to learn and iterate quickly than it is to go and like, all right, we're headed in this direction. I can't believe that everything, just like everything we learned was so wrong. What do we do? How do we go and start from scratch, right? It's not about that. It's a process of like, how do we think about an idea and we start to bring it in closer, but then we diverge again. So it's a little bit like that double diamond process that designers and product folks like to talk about how we build things, but really it doesn't happen in that linear of a way. It's a bit of 2 steps forward, 3 steps back, a big swirl back to where we started. Oh, wait, we learned that already. Let's move forward. And you have to have the appetite to do that, and the way to bring people along that keeps them excited. And again, that's another role that design gets to play in that space of getting people excited, creating that inspiration, and really being able to tell the story of how it impacts customers and the business at the end of the day.
Absolutely. Um, Super interesting. I also noticed too that you do quite a bit of teaching, and I'm curious and a lot of public speaking, but curious as to, now you've been at this for 20 plus years and you have, obviously some form of expertise and thought leadership in this space now. And uh people probably come to you for advice. People probably come to you for, kind of like setting a certain standard, and upskilling themselves and their knowledge base. What has been some of the stuff that you noticed, with your experience now of like some of the bigger challenges that up and coming, designers face, right? Like, um, and I asked this kind of like as a maybe somewhat of a loaded question, because I feel like a lot of times when I speak to senior leaders, like it become the limitation is usually psychological, and it's something that is like you mentioned, learning more about what you did wrong versus what you did right. And that I feel like is not that is somewhat that is a lot of like the personality faults of people from like getting to that next level, is that they want to be more right than wrong for whatever reason, and they look at the wrong in a different perspective than the ones that are able to look at it from maybe, again, like a learning lens, and then be able to iterate from that and move forward versus like taking it personally. But I'm curious as to like what you've seen in terms of like the ones that really like move fast, the ones that really kind of like grow in their roles versus the one that kind of gets stuck.
Yeah, so I think the thing I love about emerging designers is their curiosity and their
Yeah.
willingness to try things. And I think at some point that gets turned off and needs to be reignited in designers throughout their
Mm.
career, and there are different points in time. But I think like yes, I will always say curiosity and continuing to learn and seeing how the industry is moving. But I think what I see now in a lot of designers is people will often talk about how the craft is starting to like fall off a little bit, right? How we used to think about the entire end-to-end process. We used to think about the interactions, and now we jump to screens. And while I see that, I don't always see that, right? I encourage my designers to think about things through flows. I think like until you understand the flow, you shouldn't really jump to a screen, and unless like that's how you have to get your idea out, and then you'll leverage that to go back and create flows. So I think we need to still be able to deliver the right way that our partners need our design artifacts to tell the story and to build the product. But I think we really do need to build that alignment on what that end-to-end experience is. And we also need to develop the ability to really stand up and defend the experience. The conversation I have with my team a lot is like, use your voice, whether through storytelling or just being the one to really defend that experience. We cannot allow our customers to go through something that's subpar, right? No matter what it means, there are times where we have to make a concession to learn, to iterate, to build. But we should really like be careful with that and make sure that what is going out is something that our customers will find value in and that we're also proud of having shipped. The engineering team doesn't want to ship code that's not great. The product team doesn't want a feature that falls flat. The design team doesn't want like a poor experience for customers, but somehow sometimes that happens, right? So how do we put the right lens on things, whether it's through a UAT process, a QA process, the right ideation up front, the right checkpoints within, design reviews early and often where people are involved, making sure the requirements are accurate. It really is thinking about more than just the lane that you're in, and thinking about how collectively what's needed to drive value. So again, like thinking end to end, focusing on craft, focusing on quality, right? How do we make sure that what we're delivering is really representative of who we are as a brand out in the market and driving that forward?
Absolutely. I'm curious, as somebody who's kind of getting to like you're kind of getting to the top of what your role is in this space. What keeps you, what keeps pulling at your strings of curiosity, right? Like what kind of is getting you up in the morning and is like excited to get to work, and just maintaining your level of intensity of interest, perhaps. Because obviously I think that's what keeps people on their toes and keeps them in these roles, right? And so what is that for you at Constant Contact, or just kind of like and it doesn't have to be specific to the work. It could be like around the people, it could be around, the now kind of more of like the coaching or the teaching aspect. But yeah, what is that for you?
Yeah, I mean, I could put that in three buckets. And I think personally, at this point in my career, it's developing people and amplifying their work. That is a thing that I get up every day and I'm excited most about is how do I take a look at my team and grow them in the ways that will lead them to the best careers they could ever have. And that's through coaching, that's through providing the right amount of feedback, that's through understanding their career goals and where they want to go. I think as a design leader, it's about how we leave this industry in a better place than we found it and develop that next generation of design leaders and design executives and really like end the debates of like the seat at the table. What does this mean? What does this look like? How do we build this together? What does collaboration look like? What is strategy? And like, how do we set that next generation up so that they don't have to face the same battles that we're doing to like move the industry forward? And then at Constant Contact, I mean, aside from our mission of helping the small businesses stand tall and really like driving these outcomes for these folks who aren't marketers by trade, but making them get better marketing results for their business, it's about us using emerging technologies, right? We are leveraging AI to help customers find the right channel and the right message and the right way to market to their customers at the right time. And I think that that's providing a ton of value in a new space. And aside from that, I think it's how do we help these companies really like get results through things that feel uncomfortable to them, that they don't feel like they're experts in? How do we make a product that feels seamless and an extension of what they do and who they are so that it doesn't feel like tedious work? It's not, oh, I got to go market now in this 40 minutes I have this week to do it. But how do I like generate business for my company? How do I get that next campaign out that's going to help, help me be better at business and help my business meet the goals that I have for it? So like all three things all the time. Like I'm good when I feel like, oh, I'm a little tired in this area. It's another one that picks me up.
Interesting. Um, eh, Another question here, as we're rounding up on time, just a couple more, but as you kind of grew into this more leadership position, I know that communication, because as your teams grow, communication becomes even more critical. Is that something that, at what stage of your career do you feel like you really started to notice, and maybe that's inherent in design, but like, that communication was like such an important part, and how did you, uh, if it wasn't inherent to you, like, or maybe it was, but like, how did you continue to improve that facet of your interpersonal skills, which I could only imagine is like super critical for you to deliver on, especially number one of what you mentioned, right? Which is like coaching and drawing the best out of people. Like, yeah, like, I guess my question just boils down to is like, what have you done to become a better communicator?
Yeah, so I think I still have a long way to go, right? I think being great at communication is always a work in progress. I think anyone who's trying to really be great at something realizes their shortcomings more than what they do well. So I like to move fast, right? And I notice that as I move fast and have conversations with a few people, it doesn't always make its way through the organization. So for me, it's how do I actually establish a communication plan? What does that look like? What am I communicating? What is the main talking point of what I'm communicating? And how and who and when am I going to communicate that to? So if we're going to do a reorg, we talk to everyone that's going to be affected in that reorg individually. Then, well, first we plan it, right? There's a lot of communication that way. But as we're rolling things out, it's how do we communicate it to the people that are affected? Then how do we communicate it across all of the leadership team? How do we communicate it across the whole team? How do we hold the space to have conversation? How do we follow that up with an email in case somebody missed the message? How do we continue to reiterate through like the week after the change and check in and partner with people to really see if the message was received? And then you go back and you modify. And like I always replay conversations I have in my head and I'm like, oh, I could have said that differently. I could have said that better. But when it comes to coaching people, I think for me, like I'm honest. The people know that my intentions are coming from a good place. And I may give very direct or very blunt feedback or make something a very teachable or coachable moment in the moment, but it's only to help them like achieve a better outcome next time. If it's not something that needs immediate coaching, and the next time I talk to them, I'll say, "Hey, when I noticed in that situation you did this. Why do you think that you did that?" And in the past, I've tried it two or three different ways, and these are the outcomes that I've had. and really just talk through the situation to help them think through, because the way that I would go about it isn't going to work for them necessarily, but helping them understand like different angles at which they could have done something or designed a screen or communicated a message or anything, right? Just to really provide that way to help them think and kick the tires, so to speak, to make sure that like they've thought things through is one of the tactics that I use, but it's also something that's proven to be really good for me. But communication is so important, and there's like you could never be too good at it. I heard you have to say things 3 times for people to really hear it and sink in, but we all could do better job at clarity.
Absolutely. Um, Last question here is just, you know, uh, with so much like moving parts in terms of, I think, like how fast technology is growing, obviously with AI and all those things too, but I have my own kind of like personal opinions around it, and I don't think we're in a world yet that AI is going to take over jobs and the whole nine. But like, how are you looking at leveraging AI within your organization, either around productivity or research, or if there's another facet in which you guys are leveraging it, and what do you think you're going to be leaning more into in the next like 6 months to a year in your role with AI?
Yeah, so we haven't really scratched the surface on AI for research the way we want. We have a user research team and we gather a lot of insights, but there's no collective brain that people can query to find out what we know about customers. It's here's a link to a study or a link to a place you can find studies. And I think that AI can really like turn on a brain for us that we can access at times that we don't. So I'm really looking forward to how we do that, how we take those insights and make them actionable in a much faster way. We use AI now to help, like I said, build marketing campaigns. So we're playing with it in terms of not just text, but image generation. But when is the right time to schedule when someone would send something out? What campaign type should they send? We're using prompts to help people generate those. Tell us your goal, tell us what you're looking to do, and we can put something together for you. So we're really taking AI and making it that like co-pilot for them to help them achieve their goals. And we're like, there's so much more that we can do, and there's so much more that we're exploring that I'm really excited about the next 6, 12, 18 months of what we're going to be able to leverage.
Awesome. On that note, I want to thank you so much for taking the time out of your day today and sharing your journey, and just kind of more from a high level, your thoughts, your advice, your guidance. It was super interesting.
Awesome, Chris. Thanks for having me. Loved sharing it.